Okay. So today we're gonna add our moving obstacle. Um, we made some art on Tuesday that looks like this. It's my little snake sprite with a few different animations in there. And I also added some more frames to my character sprite to add some more animations for the character as well. And so we'll look at adding some physics just to the scene in general, and then we'll go over constructing the moving obstacle, which has a few extra parts, and that'll be our goal for today. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up the project. Since we're adding this moving obstacle, this doesn't have to necessarily be part of like a platformer style scene. But since we haven't really gone over that yet, that's what we're gonna look at. And so I'm gonna make like a really basic little scene to test this with. I'm not gonna like spend a lot of time designing it today. But we'll just add some platforms, and then we'll add some physics to the character that we're using. So I'm gonna make a new level for this. My level 1 is just kind of like an RPG style, sort of top-down thing with no platforms and no gravity. So I'll make a new level as a way to demonstrate a platformer. So I'm just gonna add a completely new level here. I'm going to create a new 2D scene, and I'm going to call this level 2, and then save this. So I'm going to save this inside my scenes folder, inside my levels folder, and Godot kind of has changed their naming thing, but I'm just going to keep this like that. It doesn't really matter that much. But so I have this level 2, and sometimes if I was creating a new level, I would like duplicate the old level so I could reuse like the tile sets and the assets and stuff like that. But I'm going to create a different like setup for my tile sets for this one, and I'm going to do it kind of quickly, so I'm not going to bother duplicating that scene. But one thing that you can do if you have stuff that you want to take from one scene and bring it over to another without having to recreate it. For example, this player guy, I kind of want to bring the player over with the camera attached and not have to go back through this whole setup. So in Godot 4, there's an old way to do it, which I thought was pretty straightforward and nice because you could really see how it worked, but they got rid of that for Godot 4. In Godot 4, what I'm going to do is just right-click on the node that I want to copy, and I'm going to click Copy. I can also just hit Command-C or probably Control-C, and then I come over to level 2, and I'm just gonna paste. And that should paste my player into my level. One thing that you could be good to go over, when I put it in here, I couldn't really see it, so I don't really know where it is because I probably moved it somewhere. So it copies all the same information, including the position. But if I hit F on the keyboard, it's gonna focus whatever it is that I've clicked over here. So if I click the camera and hit F, it'll focus the camera. And so that's a good way to find something. Another thing I can do is just say like, well, my level starts right here. So I'm just gonna go to the player and go down to the transform and just reset that transform. So now my player will just be right in the center of my level. So that'll make it a little bit easier. I might wanna bring in, some items and stuff like that, but for right now, I'm just gonna focus on creating the platforms real quick and then adding in our moving enemy. So now that I've got the player in here, I'm going to click on my main node, and I'm going to create a new tile map. So I'll just click on the plus and type in tile map. And this is a little bit of review. I'm just going to do this really quickly. So with my tile map, I just want to make some platforms so we can implement some physics and jumping and gravity and stuff. So to do that, I have to make a new tile set. So I just click on the empty tile set in my tile map and click new tile set. And then I always have to remember to click this tile set to open up the properties because it doesn't show it to us right away. And the main thing I want to change here first is I want to change the tile size because my tiles are 32 by 32. We really want to make sure that those are the same so we don't have to figure that out later. And then while I'm here, I'm going to add a physics layer. And for the physics layer, I'm going to go ahead and set the layer to tiles. And I'm going to set the collision mask to player. And then a little bit later, we're going to add our obstacle. So since we're already here, let's go ahead and add a layer name for the obstacle. And so I'm just going to call this enemy. And so this implies like something that's moving. That doesn't always have to be the case, but in this case, I'm just going to use enemy here to make it obvious. And so I'm going to mask for the player and the enemy, because in this case, the platforms have to hold up the player, but it also has to hold up the enemy. So we need to do both. So we'll go over this again in a minute, but just for the collision, remember the collision layer is the layer that the thing we're creating is on. So this is usually only one thing, and it's usually just going to be whatever that thing we're creating. So if it's a tile map, it's going to be the tiles, etc. The collision mask is the things that we want to interact with, so what it's looking for. And so our tiles are looking for the player because the player stands on the tiles, and they're looking for the enemy because the enemy stands on the tiles. They're not looking for themselves because that would not be useful, and they're not looking for the items because at least the way that they exist right now, items don't have physics applied to them. So the items are not going to run into our platforms. Okay, so we've got our physics layers set up, and we can always change this in the future if we need to. And so now I'm ready to quickly make my tile set. So I'm going to go to my tile set editor down here and grab my simple tiles, just these basic tiles here. And I'm just going to like recreate this real quick. So Godot can figure out, since this one's really simple, what my basic tiles are. I'm going to go with that. That's fine. I'm going to go over to my tile map, and I'm just going to make a really, really goofy, basic little tile platform thing so I don't have to spend too much time on it. So I'm just going to make like a little platform to start off. Maybe I'll put some dirt down here. And then we're going to be doing some physics stuff, so I'm just going to put another platform over here and one more over here. I'm not doing anything too fancy right now. If I want to later, I can come back and like actually make like a cool level. But for now, I'm just keeping things simple. And then I'll grab these 3 tiles and just kind of like randomly put maybe like this like ocean, or let's do it like this. I'll put like an ocean around everything else. And I'm not going to do a background because that would take time, but it would probably look good here. So we'll just have a little ocean with some platforms around it that we have to be on. Maybe I'll put some ocean back here as well. I don't know. That's not really necessary, but that might look a little bit better visually. Actually, yeah, let's just fill this in. It looks kind of weird, but it gives us the right idea. So now let's apply, actually I should have done this before, but we can go back now and apply our physics. So we want to land on the grass. For this example, we don't really need to worry about anything else. So if we want to be able to land on the grass, we have to add a collider to those tiles. So I'm going to go back to the tile set. This is kind of annoying to find now, but I have to go to my tile set, to go to paint, and then I have to select my physics layer down here. I wonder if I can name the physics layer to make it easier to find. I don't know. Let's not worry about that right now. So then with the physics layer, since I'm doing something really basic, this is going to be super easy. I'm just going to click that there, and it's going to apply whatever I see here to that tile. That's just going to add a square collider. It's a square tile. I don't really have to overthink this. So we've already talked about this a little bit. I'm not going to go into too much more detail here. But now we have our tile map. It should be useful for what we need it for. So let's go back and just test this scene real quick. And we'll just see. So if I run this, nothing's going to happen at first because I haven't added physics. So the player's just sitting there. I can move the player, and he does collide with the grass. But, nothing really happens. So if we want the player to have, physics applied to it, what we can do is go over here to our player properties, and we can turn use gravity on. and now the player is going to fall. And so now, if we have the jump set up correctly, when I hit the space bar or whatever key, I can also do the X key to trigger the player, we're going to see it jump. The tiles are a little too saturated, so I'm just going to go in here and change the color a little bit. So it's a little bit easier to see. This isn't really helping that much. I'll just do that. Okay. Okay, so there's a few other properties with the player. We can change how high the player jumps. It looks pretty decent right now when I jump. I don't think I really need to go up much higher than that. Let's see if I can get across the platform. Just kind of barely. Okay. So that's good enough. There's a couple other options here, like I can turn on a double jump if we want to do a double jump. That's something we can also turn on like in the game if the player gets a power up. For this level, we probably don't need it, but you know, you might want to use that. There's also a wall jump where if the player is not on a floor, but like on a wall, something that's like 90 degrees, it can jump off the wall. That's an option. And then down here, this thing called the Y limit. This is basically going to reset the level if my player goes below a certain Y. If I leave that at 0, it's going to set it according to the game window height, although it doesn't really look like it's working. Let's see if there's an error. I'm not really sure why that didn't work, but we don't really need to worry about that right now. I'll look at it later. So anyway, so now we've got our player jumping, we've got gravity, we can change the speed. We can also turn on sliding. So right now, if the player moves, he kind of just moves exactly as far as we move him. But if we turn sliding on, then the player will slide a little bit. And then we can also set the friction property to offset the sliding. So if the friction is 0, the player's just going to slide a lot. So he just keeps sliding forever, essentially. That's not what we want. So if we turn the friction a little bit lower, maybe like 200, now there's going to be a little bit of sliding, but not a ton. So you can play around with that if you want your player to slide. You don't really need to, but if that's something that you want to do, you can turn that on and play with the friction. You can also change these settings in different levels. So if we use the same player in different levels, we can change these settings per different levels. So you could have like a slidey level, you could have, you know, a jumpy level, like a less gravity level. You could have different things like that if you want. One more thing that's useful when we're looking at physics is if I go to debug, I can turn on the collision shapes when I'm previewing the game. And so this will show me why collisions are happening when they're happening. So for example, you can see because I'm using a this capsule collider, there's rounded edges. So my player doesn't just like fall immediately. If I had a square collider, it would basically, once it gets to the edge, when it goes over the edge, it'll fall. But with the capsule collider, there's gonna be this like small sort of like edge that I kind of like, well, it's kind of hard to see there because it's a pretty small collider, but you know, it'll basically like slowly fall off the edge. So that's another thing you can play with your physics, what type of kind of collisions you want to have. So that preview collision shapes can be really useful if you're just starting to do some stuff with physics. Okay, so we've got our player set up. Let's add in our obstacle, and this will give us a chance to talk about some more colliders, talk about layers some more, and add something more into our scene. So like our items and our player, our moving obstacle is also a component. So it's going to go in this components folder along with what I've got so far, which is my player, my flower obstacle, my apple, etc. So I'm going to make a new scene. And like the player, the obstacle, since it can move around and react to physics, is going to be a character body. So I'm not going to use a 2D node here. I'm going to go to other node. And I'm going to type in character, and I'll choose character body. So this isn't just for player components. It can be used for other things that we want to be able to move around in the scene. And I'm going to change this to enemy. And then I'm just going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to go back up to scenes, components, and I'll call this enemy.tscn. You don't have to capitalize it. It doesn't really matter what it is here, but I like to do everything the same. So I'll save that. And so the enemy is going to have a bunch of different parts because there's different ways that we can interact with it. You guys probably are familiar with the term hitbox in video games, like where you have to like hit an enemy to like either, you know, deal damage or whatever. You can kind of think about it like that. Like enemies have these different areas, and you can add as many as you want. The script only supports a few, but you can add more if you want to. We could talk about how to implement it, but there's just a few basic ones that are in here. Let's go ahead and actually add the script so we can see what those are. So I'm going to click on the enemy. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm just going to go ahead and add this script. So I'm going to go into scripts. This is from the scripts from the GitHub repo. Hopefully you guys have that downloaded. So this is the obstacle moving instead of the obstacle static. I'm going to click open here. And remember, to view a script, you'll see this icon, this little scroll, once we've added it into the properties here. If I click on the script icon, I can read the code. You don't need to edit this. In fact, you should not edit this unless you know what you're doing. But one thing that you can look for is things that you're going to need for the script to work. And I'm obviously going to go over those, but this is a good place to see what the titles of things should be, stuff like that. So anything that has a $sign means that the node has to be inside the enemy. So we need an animated sprite. Obviously, this is something we haven't gone over. I'm going to go over this in a second. We are going to need a hitbox. We're going to need an attack area. We're going to need a hit timeout. We have that in our static obstacle. And then we're also going to need a couple animations. We need a death animation, a walk animation, an idle animation, and somewhere in here there's an attack animation. So that's a good way to like kind of verify what we need and how to spell stuff, because remember, everything has to be spelled exactly the same capitalization, etc. So you could just copy and paste it from here. Not the $sign though. The $sign is just a way that the code can grab these nodes. So let's go ahead and just add these as we see them. So we're going to start with the animated sprite. That'll be a good thing to use to kind of see where our enemy is. I'm going to turn off the grid for this. I don't really need that on. And I'm going to add an animated sprite. We've covered this a bunch of times already, so I'm just going to go through this real quick. So once we have an animated sprite, we need sprite frames. So I'll click new sprite frames, click on here. We're going to have idle as usual. I'm going to click autoplay on that right away because that's going to be autoplayed. Then we're going to have a walk animation, and we're going to have a death animation, which is not looped. We want to turn loop off for that one. And then we're going to have an attack animation. That one also is not looped, I think. I don't really remember, but we'll see. Okay, so for the idle, we're just going to use our sprite sheet for this. So we click on the waffle, we go to sprites, we find the snake guy that I created, and we're just going to, so this is a 3x4. So let's zoom in a little bit. So for the idle animation, I just have these 3 frames. I'm going to like copy and paste this middle one, and then let's zoom in a little bit, and let's hit play and just see what that looks like. So then I'm going to copy and paste the first one a bunch of times, and maybe copy and paste this one again. And maybe I'll drag this one to the end. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I'm just going to play around with it. I'm just going to take those 3 frames and kind of move them around to make something that looks a little bit more interesting. But for now, we don't have to do anything too crazy. Okay, so that's our idle animation. He's just sitting there. And this is, you actually don't necessarily need this, but I'll show you why we have this in a minute. We also have the walk animation. So I'm going to grab the same sprite sheet and do 3x4. And my walk animation is just these 2 frames, I think. Yeah. And let's see what that looks like. That's pretty good, I guess. It looks kind of goofy, but I'm not going to redraw anything right now. That's good enough. So I'll save that. Next, we have our attack animation. So this will be triggered when the snake gets near the player. This is the same sprite sheet, 3x4. Oh, whoops. Okay, so the attack one is this one and this one. And let's see. Oh, I have loop on, so I can't really see that. Okay, that looks good enough. Whatever, we'll see what that looks like. I might actually... I'm going to read the script real quick and see if I really need loop on for that. I don't think so. Okay, so that's fine. We'll see. If I do, I can fix it later. Okay, so I'm going to turn the loop off so we get more attacking action. Okay, and then I have my death one. Just going to grab that sprite sheet one more time. Grab these last 3 frames. And let's see what that looks like. Okay. I could probably use a few more frames there, but it's good enough. So we've got our animated sprite. That's good to go. So then let's go back to our enemy. So the next thing we need this thing to make sure our enemy doesn't like fall off a platform. You might not need this depending on what your level setup is like. But if you have platforms that have edges, the enemy will just walk off the end unless we tell it not to. So for this, we're going to use a new thing called a raycast. And a raycast is basically like a simplified version of a collision box. When you have 2 things that need to collide, you need to know like the general shape of things. But if you just need to know if something is like under something, it's much easier just to use a raycast because it's basically just a line. And so it's easier for the game engine to do that physics calculation really quickly to just say, does this line intersect with something? The one thing we do have to change this to platform checker. That's what it's called in the code, which we can see right here. So if we don't change that, it's not going to work correctly. Okay, so that's going to keep our snake on the platforms. So that's good. Okay, so now we just have to add in some collision shapes. So the main snake body is the thing that's going to work with the character body to keep the snake on a platform. So this is kind of similar to the player collision shape. I'm just going to add a collision shape here. The snake is basically a circle, so I'm going to use a circle here. You could use a square or whatever you want. It doesn't really matter that much. I'm just going to make it a little smaller than the art, so the snake overlaps just a little bit with the other parts of the scene. And this is just going to keep the snake on the platforms. It's really not going to do much else. And for the enemy, actually, while we're doing that, let's take a look at the enemy's collisions. So we need to put the enemy on the enemy layer and turn off the player. But we are going to mask for the player. The enemy can hit the player, and the enemy can hit the tiles. And then we're actually going to have 3 other components to the enemy's collision. So we're going to add a few more layers. So one component is the attack area. This is just going to trigger if the enemy gets close to the player, it's going to attack the player. Another component is the hit box. So this is just if the player hits this area, it'll kill the enemy. And the way the script is written up, the enemy will just die immediately. If you want to add like damage and stuff, we can do that. But for the default, it just dies. And then there's another area for detecting the player, which I'm just going to call detect. And so this way we can sort of have the enemy just stand in one place. But then if the player gets near it, then it'll start moving. That's just another option. It's not necessary to use it, but it's another option that's available. And it's also a good way to just kind of talk about these different types of collisions. Okay, so let's add these in. So these are all just going to be different areas. So I'm just going to add them real quick. I'm just going to say area 2D. I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm just going to do that 2 more times just to save myself some time. I don't have to type it in again. But make sure they're all part of the enemy. We don't want them to be inside each other like this. That will mess up how they work. And so the first one is called attack. And then the second one is called hitbox. And then the last one is called detect. And I'm just going to double check the code to make sure those are right. So let's go through. So hitbox, it looks good. Capital H, capital B. Oh, actually, we're just going to connect these signals. So as long as they're attack and detect, yeah. Okay, so those all look good. So let's make those shapes real quick. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but the place that you put these shapes in is going to really change the gameplay, because it's going to change how easy it is for you to kill the enemy, and it's going to change how easy it is for the enemy to attack you. So starting with the attack, wherever I put this, when the player enters this area, the snake is going to attack. So for this one, I'm going to add a collision shape. So I have to add like a whole new area, a whole new collision shape. And so for this shape, I'm going to use a rectangle. And there's a couple of different ways I could go about this. One is I could put the rectangle on both sides of the snake, so the player, will get attacked if we try to sneak up on it. Or I could try to move it to the front of the snake, and then it'll move around when the snake turns around. So that way, the player will only get hurt if it's in front of the snake. That's probably what I want, but you can play with this and really do whatever you want. So that is going to be our player attack area. And we'll obviously test that to make sure it's in the right place. So for the collision, we have to make sure to put these all on the right collisions, or we'll get weird results. So this goes in the attack layer, not the player layer. And for this one, we only have to mask for the player. The snake body is what's going to keep it on the tiles, so we don't care about anything else. We're just looking for the player here. Okay, our next one is our hitbox. So again, depending on where you put this, this is where you're going to kill the snake. So I need another collision shape. For this one, I'm going to choose a circle. I'm going to make it small, and I'm going to... Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. Let's turn this off for a second. I'm going to put it like basically right here. Obviously, the smaller you make this, the harder it is to get the snake. The bigger it is, the easier it is to get the snake. So if we make it really small and just like right where the snake's head is, it's going to be harder to get the snake. The other thing is that the snake turns around, at least the default version. We can edit the code if you don't want that to be the case, but it's really important for everything to be centered, because when we turn around, essentially it's just going to flip this whole thing. And if it's not centered correctly, it's going to be offset from the art. We can change that if we need to, but that's kind of the default setup just to keep things simple. Okay, so that's our hitbox. Now our detect area can be really big. And again, this one, let's add another collision shape. This one is not going to hurt the player. It's just going to alert the snake that the player's around. And so you might want to use a circle and like do it like that. But then if the player's like up here, it'll alert the snake. So you could do a similar thing where you could put it like in front of the snake, or you could do like a different shape, like a rectangle, and say like, it's just the snake's vision. Or maybe the snake has like, sixth sense and it can see the player coming behind it. Whatever you want to be the case in your game is how you want to set this up. Okay, so now we have a whole bunch of these things, and real quick before we add this into our scene, it's going to get hard to edit in Godot, because when I'm trying to click on this, I'm moving that one. I'm trying to click on this other one, I'm moving that. So what you can do to prevent that is click on these lock and no select buttons if you don't want to move something. So now if I lock all these down, and let's say I want to move the platform checker, I'm locking everything down except for the platform checker, so that when I move this, I can do that really easily. Then if I want to move something else, I'm going to lock down the platform checker, I'll unlock the detect box, and now I can move that. So those little icons up here, I want to apply them to the main node here. Those are really useful if I have a lot of components in the scene and I want to be able to edit different things individually. Okay, there's one more thing we have to add before we go back, which is our hit timeout. This is just a timer, and we just have to call this hit timeout. This means if the snake attacks us, there's going to be a timeout before it can attack us again. If you don't want this, you can set it to 0, so the snake can just like keep getting you. Whatever you set as the time here is how long there will be before the snake can attack you again. Did I do my collisions? I didn't. I always forget to do this. Okay, so let's make sure we do our collisions for the rest of our things. So for the hitbox, the layer is hitbox, turn off player. That's it. That's all we have to do. And for the detect, we turn off player, turn on detect, and we mask for player, so that's already good to go. All right, we're set this up. We're gonna throw it into our level. So I'm gonna click on level 2, the main node, and remember when I wanna create an instance of something that is a separate scene, I click on this link or instantiate button. Here's my enemy. I'm gonna click open. And now I have this little snake enemy. I'm gonna move him over here. And let's test all this stuff and see if it works. So you can see there's all these different platforms or properties here. So I'm just gonna run the scene. And, okay, we probably spelled platform checker wrong. Oh, wait, this is one thing I forgot to do. So I really should just leave this as is, but in the code, this is called collider. I probably just did that to make the code shorter. So we have to change this to collider. That's why I got that error. I forgot to do that before. If you get that error, just change. This is the collision for the enemy. It's not one of these ones down here. So that just has to be called collider. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, there's our snake. It's doing something weird, but we'll debug that in a second. And we can see all of the different thingies. Okay, so one of the things that we can change is we can just say we don't want the snake to move at all. If I turn is moving off, it's not even gonna try to move. We already have a stationary obstacle, so there's no real reason to do that, but it is an option. Then you can change the speed if you want to. Then we have this stay on platform. So if I turn that off, the player should just like walk off the platform. This obviously is not what we want to happen, but there might be instances where you want that to happen. Then the direction is what direction the snake will be facing. If it's -1, it'll be facing towards the player or to the left. If we change that to 1, then your snake will be facing the other direction. Something is making it glitch. I'm not 100% sure what that is, but we'll figure that out in a second. But yeah, that should turn the snake around. And then the activate on player is what's going to do the activate on player. So we'll fix the glitch in a second, but first I'm going to see if the snake will attack me if I get into this little box. Okay, he's not attacking me, but let's see if no, I can't kill it either. Okay. So we must have an error. We're not getting an error though. So that's kind of interesting. Let's go to our player and just turn on all these layers. That might have something to do with it. We didn't used to have to do that, but let's see if that fixes it. Okay, we're still not getting anything. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I always forget to do this. I didn't attach any of our signals. Okay, we have a bunch of signals we have to attach. So we have to attach our animated sprites. Sprite frames. Okay, so we have to go over to node. So animation finished. We have to attach this. So it should be pretty obvious when I go to pick. I'm gonna go to animation finished and click connect. And this is just like before. This green arrow should show up on a function that already exists. If it shows up on a new function that says pass, that means that it didn't work correctly. We have to attach our attack. So we have to attach body entered for the attack. So this is when the player enters. So we're gonna say on attack body entered, connect that. Then same thing for each one of these. So body entered for the hitbox because the player is a body. So body entered to the hitbox. So we'll say on hitbox body enter, connect, and then detect body entered and click to detect on detect. So we're gonna pick on detect, and then is there one for the hit timeout? I don't think so. Okay. And there's actually one other thing with Godot 4. They have an extra setting somewhere that I keep forgetting about. Transform. Collision. Motion mode. I don't see it on here. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, our snake is still glitching out. Okay, but he is attacking me, so that's cool. And then now I can get him. Okay, so let's see if I jump on top. So I killed the snake before he killed me, so that's good. Let's try the detect. So now if I turn the activate on player detect, now the snake should just like not try to move unless I get in here. And then it's still glitching out, but it is trying to move. So that's good. Okay. So let's see if I can fix the glitch, but if not, I'll just stop there. So let's see. With our enemy collision. Okay, it's looking for the tiles. Oh, you know what I didn't do is I didn't put my tile map on the tile layer. This is the thing with these collisions. So in my tile set physics layers, oh, I did put it there. Okay, so let's make sure we're looking for the enemy. We are. Okay, I don't know why it's glitching out then. Oh, okay, another thing I probably forgot. I didn't put the platform checker. We need to check for tiles, not player. Okay, so the collision masks are almost always the thing that we get tripped up on. So for the platform checker, the raycast that I added before, the collision mask has to be set to the tiles because otherwise it doesn't know that it's looking for tiles. Now I think it should work. Okay, now our snake is just chilling. If we get him here, now he's gonna attack me. And so I can jump over him and I can try to kill him. Or I guess I can just push him off. That works too. Okay, so that I think is everything. I want to stop there so you guys have time to work. So I'm not going to go over documentation today, but it's the same thing as before. Just upload your sprite sheets to OpenLab. When you're running the scene, just take a little screenshot. You might want to turn your collision shapes off first. And, you know, I don't know. It'll be hard. The thing that would be useful for a video is that it's hard to document once the game actually has like moving parts. Like if the snake is moving, I can like take a screenshot real quick, but it doesn't really like show what's going on. I'll just show it real quick. So if you want to take a video, I actually don't know if it's gonna work because I'm recording, so I might stop and then show it, but let's see if I can do it. So if I want to do a screenshot, one of the options I have, okay, so yeah, it doesn't give me the option for video right now. So I'm gonna stop the recording and I'll go over this, but there are videos on the OpenLab documentation page that are gonna go over the same steps that I'm gonna go over right now. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the video here.